Welcome to Wednesdays in the Word. A little boy was saying his prayers before heading to bed. It would be the last night in this house, for he would be moving first thing in the morning. He and his family were moving from Georgia to California. Well, after some thanks to God, followed by a couple of requests and then his amen, the little boy thought of one other thing he needed to say to the Lord. He said, I guess this is goodbye, God, because we're moving to California. Now imagine his surprise when he got to California and found that God was already there. So there isn't a place where we can go where God isn't present, even California. Well, we return tonight to Psalm 139. Psalm 139. If you ever wonder, does anybody really care and know about me? This psalm is for you. We looked at the first 6 verses last week in our Wednesdays in the Word. We saw this simple yet profound truth. God is greater than we know. He's greater than what we know. God is never surprised or caught off guard. He never says, wow, I didn't see that coming. No detail escapes his watching eyes. God knows everything. God knows all about you. God knows all about me. And with spiritual X-ray vision, God peers into our souls and sees us for who we really are. Well, with that fact in mind, I think we then can appreciate the psalmist's response to this truth. It appears that David, the writer of Psalm 139, is a little unnerved by that thought and considers running from God's knowledge of him. He soon realizes how little good that would do. So in verses 7 through 10 of Psalm 139, it point out that there's no place a person can go to escape God's knowledge. And so David rhetorically asks 2 questions in verse 7. He says, where can I go from your spirit, and where can I flee from your presence? 2 questions that anticipate one answer: nowhere. And after employing poetic parallelism in which the 2 questions complement each other, David uses 2 pairs of hypothetical opposites. Verses 8 and 9. If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, meaning Sheol, or death's holding place, the grave, you are there. In other words, as far as you can go up, and as far as you can go down, and as far as you can go, and everything in between, God is present there. Verse 9, if I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, meaning if he goes as far east as possible and far west as he can go, God is there also. And again, and everywhere in between. And not only is God there, but we have these words of reassurance. Even there, your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast or hold me secure. See, even better than God simply being there, his presence sustains us. Even better than God showing up in those places, he is there wanting what is best for us. You see, God isn't this cosmic killjoy going wherever you are to ruin your fun or to catch you doing something you shouldn't be doing. His presence is actually a good thing. A very good thing. And that's where this psalm will eventually take us, but David isn't quite there yet. He's feeling the weight of God's presence. That even if he could run from God's presence, he could not hide from God's presence. Darkness cannot hide us from God, David says in verses 11 and 12. So we can turn off the lights, we can pull the shades, we can go under the covers, we can keep some secret from everyone else, but nothing is hidden from God's sight. He sees every website you visit, every text and email you send. He knows what your eyes look at, and if you cheat on a test or rip off someone on the job. He knows what you whisper behind someone's back and reads every unspoken word on your mind. Now, all that's true, and it's quite sobering, isn't it? But David now moves from this knowledge of God being a little unsettling and unnerving to finding great comfort in God's omniscience. We say that in his words in verse 17. David says, how precious to me are your thoughts, O God, how vast is the sum of them. David's appreciation for this all-knowing God changes. what might have felt unnerving to the point of trying to get away from it and flee, David now considers it precious, valuable. Now, if you're following along with me in this psalm, or you're on top of your game tonight, you'd have noticed that I skipped over verses 13 through 16 that speak of God's hand in creating us. Well, I thought I was going to work through this psalm in two parts. Guess what? There's a third part that we'll come back to in verses 13 through 16 next week in our Wednesdays in the Word, because those verses are deserving of special attention. See, verses 13 through 16 are truths that inspire David to burst out in praise to God, and verse 17 that I just read, "How precious to me are your thoughts, O God, how vast is the sum of them." He goes on, verse 18, "Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand." See, the fact that God thinks of David down to the last detail of his life blows David away. To even try and count the vastness of God's knowledge of David, it would be impossible. It would be like trying to count the grains of the sand. And David seems almost lost for words to express his praise. And he ends verse 18 by saying, "When I am awake, I'm still with you." See, God greets you each morning with fresh mercy. You fall asleep at night on God's mind, and when you awake, you're still on his mind. God never stops thinking of you. Do you think about God thinking about you? Do you think about God thinking about you? The God who created everything from nothing by his word is thinking of you right now. There's nothing that he can't do, and he's thinking of you. Doesn't that excite you? Doesn't that encourage your heart? The creator of heaven and earth has you on his mind. This is not just anybody who thinks about you. This is God who is thinking of you. How can we not, like David, break out in praise and say, "How precious to me are your thoughts, O God"? Listen, you matter to God. You may feel like you've been stepped on, beat up, or maybe kicked around. You may feel dirty, unworthy, or useless, but you matter to God. Maybe your parents have said words that ring in your ears to this day, or they didn't say words you were longing to hear. Maybe the one you needed approval from or rejected you or abandoned you. Perhaps that acceptance you wanted from your peers still eludes you. Don't draw conclusions about yourself based on them. Don't let what another human does define you. Listen, you matter to God. You matter to God so much that he sent his son Jesus for you. You belong, you're cherished, you're his forever. This is practical stuff here. In these verses, the Bible teaches you that God himself, the creator of heaven and earth, thinks of you. And the only godly reason for thinking about what God thinks of us is to get our focus on making much of our great God. Making much of our great God. Let his thoughts of you lead you to profound praise for initiating a forever relationship with you. He knows you. He knows your sin. He knows your need of a Savior. He knows the only thing that can fill the ache in our hearts. He knows the answer to any restlessness or anxiety and loneliness and our deepest cravings. This is amazing grace that the God who knew everything about you would give up his life for you and pursue a relationship with you. The God who knows us intimately wants us to know him. I mean, how good is that? How amazing is that? He invites us to know him. Do you know the God who knows you? Do you keep coming to the one who knows you? This is what frees us from living a life of pretenses. This is what revives our prayer life. This is what awakens our affections for him. I mean, church, can you imagine the difference it would make in our lives if we lived as though we have nothing to hide from God? How freeing it would be living with the awareness that God already knows everything about you, understands how you're made, knows what it is you really need, and wants to take you to what is best for your life. You see, he doesn't change you in order to love you. He changes you because he loves you. The one who knows it all knows what's best for your life. Matt Chandler put it this way. He said, God doesn't love some future version of you. He loves you now. And that assurance of his love opens the way to this prayer, verses 23 and 24. Search me, O God, know my heart. Test me as a refiner would test metal. Know my anxious thoughts. Have any of those? See if there's any offensive way in me, literally the way of pain. See if there's any way of pain in me, and instead lead me in the way everlasting. Do you see where David ends up? He's requesting that God examine him. As he comes to more deeply know the one who knows him through and through, he desires nothing less than complete conformity to God's will. So he prays for God's examination of his soul, of his heart. And since God knows it all, it should drive us to honestly face what's going on inside. If we long to know ourselves better, then it requires being willing to place ourselves under the scrutiny of God's truth. Will you let God show you what is in your heart? Will you let God do his work right here? I mean, has it been a while since you've sat still long enough for God to do surgery on your heart? Will you open all the rooms in your life to him, or is there still that closet, that room, that compartment in life that's off limits to his lordship? Will this be the cry of your heart? Search me, O God, and know me. Know my heart. Test me. Know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Go to God in brutal honesty. No shallow prayers, no more saying what it is we think we want God to hear, but praying from a position of confidence in that he knows me, he loves me, and he's thinking of me. What a way to live. Let Psalm 139 awaken the affections of your heart. Let Psalm 139 pour over you like cool water on a hot day. Let Psalm 139 drive you towards him. What does God's knowledge of you do for you? That his presence is everywhere. To run from him or to run to him? If you were driving around the corner and as you look at the top of the hill, you see a police officer with a radar gun pointed in your direction. You know he knows how fast you're going. What do? Likely you would at least check your speed and if necessary adjust that speed. What you wouldn't do is step on the gas pedal and wave to the police officer as you go zipping by. Well, God sits at the top of your life. You know he knows. What do? Well, let it draw you to look at the dashboard of your life and change what you need to change. Let his knowledge of you drive you towards him. Let it slow you down in great appreciation of the one who knows you and loves you, and because of that, longs to change you to what is best for your life and for his glory. Blessings to you, church.